Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Meron, and coming up in today's newscast, Prime Minister Bennett calling for renewed coronavirus restrictions as the Indian Delta variant continues to spread. Meanwhile, Israel reportedly refusing to renegotiate a vaccine swap agreement with the Palestinian Authority after Ramallah used a lie to kill the deal. And finally, an official state investigation into the tragedy at Mount Meron approved by the cabinet in Jerusalem. Stay tuned for this and much more. The so-called Delta variant of COVID-19, or the strain first recorded in India, causing serious concerns back in Israel. The recent outbreaks of this highly infectious variant in Israeli schools, coupled with increasing international travels, is forcing the government to revisit its previously lifted restrictions. First, the government is likely to reinstate certain mask mandates while investing more in the campaign to get parents to vaccinate kids aged 12 through 15. But the coalition is also hoping, among other things, to increase police deployment for the sake of enforcing quarantines. A testing facility with an increased number of test stands at Ben Gurion International Airport will hopefully also be reestablished. A ban on travel to high-risk countries with few exceptions will be imposed, and fines may even be levied against parents whose children violate isolation orders.
אני רוצה להבהיר, האסטרטגיה הלאומית צריכה להישען לא על רגל אחת רק של חיסונים, כי אם מחר יש וריאנט עוקף חיסון, הכל מתמוטט. אנחנו גם עם החיסונים, אבל גם תחת הנחה שלא לכל מגפה או וריאנט בהכרח יהיה חיסון. אנחנו צריכים על ידי ניהול נכון להימנע ממצב של אובדן שליטה.
Joining us with more is Professor Manfred Green, Director of the Masters in Public Health Program at the University of Haifa. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Now, what do you think of the new or new-ish health policies? Will they be effective?
Well, just one or two comments. The Delta is just because of the new naming policy of Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta. Previously, it was named after places. As you mentioned, it was derived from India. But, I think we're going to be encountering this kind of situation regularly. This is a virus that changes, it mutates. It's an RNA virus, so it's not very stable. So it's not something that we're going to deal with just for today or tomorrow. And we have to think of the future. So maybe I'll be a little bit controversial and say that as long as we are maintaining a situation where the disease rate is not high, it's low, and we're not overburdening the health services, I think that we need to be, shall we say, a little bit more liberal with what we do now and allow the population to try and get back to a normal situation.
All right, well, many decisions in Israel's coronavirus response thus far have been painted as being politically and not medically or medicinally motivated. Do you see these latest announcements as being any less political?
Yeah, it's very difficult often to distinguish between the political and the not political, but most of the decisions have made sense epidemiologically and health-wise. There may be tinges of timing and also the exposure on the media, which I guess politicians may be getting some benefit, but they also take some blame. So, I don't think there's a real political issue here. I think it's very much a public health issue.
All right, now there seems to be still some disagreement, or at least marginally contradictory edicts. For one, Israel is trying to toughen the borders, but Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked is simultaneously pushing to allow for more tourism by July 1st. Is there really a way to eat our cake and have it too? Or do we need to restrict entry with more caution? Or again, does this go back to what you were saying earlier about being more liberal?
It's good to be cautious, but I think we need to move ahead. And I think that we shouldn't be caught up in a situation where we feel that we're going to live with this kind of situation forever and keep closing borders and lockdowns and so on. We need to know how to live with the virus, keep it down to a very low level, make sure that the high percentage of the population are vaccinated, and make sure that the health system is not overwhelmed. So I would certainly agree with trying to relax restrictions and then follow very closely what happens. I think we can afford to do that right now.
All right, now, is there any other decision maybe that you'd like to see that is not being discussed?
A very controversial one, and that is, which I say all the time, we need to make sure that the Palestinians are vaccinated. And I think that's an obligation of the state of Israel. I think that we are not doing what we should be doing. So that's my feeling.
All right, Professor Manfred Green, thank you so much again for joining us and for sharing your insights.
Pleasure.
Now, speaking of coronavirus, the Palestinian Authority now hoping to renegotiate the terms of their vaccine swap agreement with Pfizer and Israel. But after agreeing to signing and then later reneging on the deal, Israel is not so fast to return to talks. And other nations are now reportedly looking to capitalize on the Palestinians' oversight. You snooze, you lose. That's the general message that Palestinian health officials are now receiving from Israel. This as the Palestinian Authority saying that it hopes to renegotiate terms of a vaccine swap agreement signed with Jerusalem and Pfizer just last week. Jerusalem, for its part, though, now reportedly engaged in talks with at least 3 other countries who want to replace Ramallah as the recipient of some 1.7 million COVID vaccines. And if an agreement is reached, it would be the same swap deal Israel signed with the PA before the Palestinians pulled a 180. That is, that Israel would give another country vaccines from its current stocks set to expire by the end of summer. And in return, Israel would receive the same amount of vaccines from the recipient nation's future vaccine imports. It's a deal reached with Pfizer's blessings, intended to make the best use of vaccine doses already in circulation. So why cancel the deal in the first place? Well, according to the PA, delays in negotiations meant that the first shipment was likewise pushed back, and Israel's first shipment of some 90,000 doses was set to expire 10 days after its delivery on Friday. The PA Health Ministry in response alleging that the doses don't meet health standards with such a close expiration date, and the shipment was promptly returned. This argument, however, fails to hold water for a number of reasons. For one, Israel and Pfizer both claimed that the PA knew full well about the expiration date before signing. In fact, as established earlier, preventing the waste of available vaccines and inoculating as many people as soon as possible was the point of the deal in the first place. Second, the West Bank Health Ministry is contradicting its own complaints, having admitted just hours before rejecting the deal that it could vaccinate upwards of 80,000 citizens per day, more than enough to make good use of the 90,000 doses in the first shipment, as well as all other shipments planned thereafter. And finally, the sudden rejection of the deal comes only after harsh criticism from the Palestinian public, accusing Israel of attempting to poison them and accusing the Palestinian Authority of Israel normalization. In other news, in accordance with ongoing ceasefire talks, Israel now relaxing restrictions on certain products entering and exiting the Hamas-run Gaza Strip. Agricultural and textile exports, for example, now allowed to resume, as will the delivery of normal mail services, where thousands of travel documents have allegedly been waiting to make their way into Gaza. All that said, however, while ceasefire negotiations are making progress, cross-border violence, including incendiary balloons, still trickling into southern Israeli communities. So speaking from a memorial for soldiers who died during the 2014 Gaza war, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett sharing harsh warnings for Hamas terror group leaders, Bennett claiming that a new Israeli policy is here to stay and that Hamas will have to get used to it.
אבל אלימות וטרור הם לא תופעות טבע או גזרות גורל שמדינת ישראל אמורה להשלים איתן. ברצועת עזה, מצידו השני של הגבול, יצטרכו להתרגל לתפיסה ישראלית אחרת של יוזמה, של תקיפות, של חדשנות. אך באותה העת יכירו אויבינו את הכללים. לא נסבול אלימות, לא נסבול טפטופים, לא נבין או נכיל סוררים. הסבלנות שלנו אזלה.
Moving on, we head to Vienna, where Iranian and Western officials are still working hard towards a return to some form of the JCPOA nuclear agreement. But many, particularly in the Middle East, are still skeptical of the Ayatollah's intentions, especially after Iran's presidential election in which Ebrahim Raisi, aka the hangman of Tehran, received the nomination. Joining me with the analysis, diplomatic correspondent with the Times of Israel, Lazar Berman. Lazar, thank you so much for being with us. Now, in a recent piece on the topic that you wrote, you allege that Raisi's election sparks an August 3rd deadline, really, for re-signing the JCPOA, August 3rd being the date that Raisi officially takes office. Why is this the deadline, and for whom is the deadline more important, Iran or the P5-1 powers?
Sure. So it's a deadline because Rouhani is still in office. So he's the president who is finishing his second four-year term, and he will be in office until August 3rd. Now, I believe that the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, has been slow-walking the talks to reach this time where he can now accelerate the negotiations. And what he wants to have happen now is for the deal to be finalized while Rouhani is still in office. That way, the moderate camp can be blamed for any concessions made to the West. And over the next few months, as America starts lifting sanctions and Iran's economy starts getting back on track, Raisi and the new administration can start reaping the benefit in terms of popular support and start winning over a country that elected this new president with the lowest turnout in history. So this is really an Iranian deadline, but of course, if it's an Iranian deadline, then it turns into a deadline for the West as well.
You're basically saying that Iran is hoping to blame any sort of issues or criticisms within Iran or of Iran on the previous administration, on the Rouhani and Zarif. Does that extend to the potential for intentional breaking of the deal?
Well, I don't think that Iran intends to break this deal. I think that the Supreme Leader and the camp that many call the reformists, but they're not reformists in any way. They're Republicans who believe that Iran needs to have constructive relations with the outside world. The Supreme Leader believes or deeply is convinced that this camp is correct, that Iran's future depends on it having an economy that is tied to the world. And the way to do that is to get back into the JCPOA and to have America remove sanctions. So I believe that Iran is dedicated to getting back into this deal and intends to do what it must to make that deal happen in the next couple of months, because Iran's future in terms of its economy and its ties with the outside world depend on getting back into it.
All right, what happens if a deal is not signed by August 3rd? Does that mean it's essentially dead?
It really does, in my opinion. I cannot imagine that this new administration, the Raisi administration, obviously much more conservative, hardline, and I would say revolutionary, is going to be willing to make the concessions that the Rouhani administration was not willing to make, and certainly not in the first few months. Now, while those two sides, Iran and the West, are far apart, Iran is going to continue to be doing what it has been doing over the recent months, which is accelerating its enrichment and starting to intentionally and very publicly open up other nuclear-related activities. That means there's going to be an escalation. That means the two sides are going to be further and further apart. And at some point, we're going to reach a point of no return where a return to the JCPOA is not possible. Any sort of nuclear deal will have to be a totally new one, and that will, of course, take months and probably years to get back to.
So again, I feel like I have to ask, what are the chances, and I know that you said earlier that you don't believe Iran is intending to break the deal, but is there any sort of chance that Iran is thinking, oh, we're gonna go after our nuclear ambitions regardless of a deal, and by signing it while Zarif and Rouhani are still in power, we can use them as a scapegoat? Is there any chance for that?
Well, of course, I'm not inside the Iranian decision-making process, but I don't believe that Iran has made the political and strategic decision to actually go after a weapon. I think it's clear that they want to reserve the right as a sovereign nation, as a powerful nation, as they see themselves, to nuclear power, as a lot of their neighbors do. And of course, they want to keep moving toward that possibility if ever they do decide to move toward breakup. But I don't think a decision has been made to go for a weapon. I think, as I said, the most important interest now is to get the economy back on track, to relieve some suffering on the middle class, which is shrinking drastically. And any sort of future drastic moves, like deciding to move toward a nuclear weapon, can be made down the road. And I would also add that it was very important for the Supreme Leader to get Raisi into power, and he was willing to oversee the cancellation of moderate candidates because he's starting to think about his succession. He's 82 years old now, and he wants to handpick a successor and maybe even make drastic changes to the structure, to the political structure of the Islamic Republic.
All right, Laser Berman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now back in Israel, former Prime Minister, now head of the opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, is planning the final stages of his transfer of power to the new Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, including his exit from the Prime Minister's official residence. But Netanyahu is not going quietly into that good night. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
In an agreement between Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and former Premier Benjamin Netanyahu, Netanyahu is to vacate the Prime Minister's official residence by no later than July 10th. And in the meantime, no more official meetings are to be hosted there. This following last week's public uproar over Netanyahu's hosting of former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, and Christians United for Israel founder Pastor John Hagee at the official Balfour residence, and in a seemingly official way. One issue dealt with, however, and another coming to light. The new Constitutional Law and Justice Committee head, MK Gilad Kariv, calling for official probes to be opened against Netanyahu, the former premier accused of ordering staffers to shred documents, just hours before the Knesset voted on confirming the new coalition, unseating Netanyahu after 12 consecutive years in office. In fact, according to Channel 12 reports, a significant amount of shredding occurred, and at the hands of Netanyahu's closest staffers, as opposed to standard office employees. Netanyahu, for his part, outright rejecting the accusations as outlandish. In any case, the security officer at the Prime Minister's office is now set to open an internal probe along with Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit. And if deemed necessary, an official state investigation will then be carried out by either the Defense Ministry or the Shin Bet Intelligence Directorate. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Gantz also requesting to renew probes into the submarine affair, or Case 3000, which surrounds serious allegations of an incredible bribery scheme, a conflict of interest, and the purchase of naval vessels worth billions of shekels. Netanyahu, while not named in the case, is thought to have potentially benefited financially from the affair. But the request is likely to fail, with members of the coalition even calling Gantz petty, especially after his first call for probes were dropped by Attorney General Mandelblit due to Mandelblit's own already ongoing investigation.
In unrelated news, another probe set to be opened, but this one into the Lag BaOmer tragedy on Mount Meron, a fatal crowd crush incident which left 45 people dead last April. The State Commission of Inquiry Task Force is expected to be approved by the government with the aim of investigating everything about that fateful night. And this will reportedly include looking into legal and professional questions with respect to safety at the event, as well as into the factors and parties involved in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Meanwhile, several have already been named as potentially responsible, at least in part, but individual investigations being conducted to determine guilt and level of involvement. Suspects including Haredi former ministers of Knesset, who reportedly pushed authorities to overlook limitations and allow the festivities to take place. And this in addition to more directly involved officials like those in charge of security and planning, Police Commissioner Yaakov Shabtai, Northern District Police Chief Shimon Levi, and several others, for example. Now, our final topic tonight, Israel's Arab minority population facing a serious struggle. Violence in the Arab sector, a longtime issue, seemingly getting worse by the day. And this is despite many politicians' focus and billions of shekels in investments over the years. In fact, several shootings have been reported in just the past week, one of which left a local government official in the hospital. So all eyes are now resting on the Arab Ram Party and whether its new $9.1 billion budget for reforming the Arab sector will make any difference. Joining me to discuss is Israeli journalist, author, and attorney Ben-Dror Yemini. Ben-Dror, thank you so much again for being with us. Now, how can we best describe the issue? How bad is violence in the Arab sector in Israel?
We know it's bad. It's very bad, and many times we are looking for the people to blame. The blame game. But I think that we have to change attitude because before everything else, we have to look at the Arabs in Israel. Take responsibility. I mean, if it's something which is happening to you, which is you are paying the price, you are paying the price. And it's not a question of money, it's a question of culture. It's a question of you yourself fighting against this kind of increasing crime events. I mean, what about you? What about self-responsibility? Because we think money can solve the problems. No, money cannot solve the problems. Money, I mean, you can have more policemen and so on, but it will not solve the problem unless the Arab leaders, the Arab religious people will begin, they themselves, to speak against it.
So,
And up to now, they are not doing it.
all right, so Mansour Abbas, does his new plan effectively address these issues? Because, as you said, throwing money at this blindly is not going to solve it, of course. So we have a $9.1 billion plan under Mansour Abbas. Is that going to work?
We know, for many years now, I know about him. Before it was, his connection with Benjamin Netanyahu was famous. He has a good will. He really wants to change things. I have no idea if he has the right plan to do it, but as long as I hear so many Arab leaders, mainly from the Arab Joint Party, supporting the criminals, supporting the rioters against Israel, eventually it's a boomerang. I mean, what they're doing is to give justifications to crimes against themselves. They don't mean that they want to justify crimes against Arabs, but this is the outcome, this is the result, and money is not the solution. Culture, yes, and self-responsibility is the main solution to the problem.
So again, how does Mansour Abbas's approach differ to previous plans?
I don't know if any of us, I don't know about his plans. I don't know about what he's going to do with the money. Money is good. Maybe money can help with more police people and so on, but it's not the only way. I don't know. Nobody, by the way, saw what is his plan in order to solve the problem. I did not see it. I don't think it was published, so I guess maybe he is working on it. I know only one thing, that according to a lot of things that he said in the last 5 years, nothing to do with this coalition, he has the goodwill in order to change the situation. I do know that years ago he spoke about, first of all and before everything else, we have to respect the Israeli law. He said it. He expressed some views that are not accepted by his colleagues to the Arab leadership.
So how is... Well, I was going to say, following up with what you're saying, has the Arab-Israeli community, especially Ram supporters, have they accepted Abbas's choice to join the coalition? Is he gaining support in the Arab sector?
No, it's very interesting because his colleagues did not confirm, they are not supporting him because right now, he is part of the coalition and they are against the coalition. So it's not a question of what is good and what is bad. The question is a political question for them. But we have to bear in mind that the Israeli Arabs supported him. They gave him 4 seats in the Knesset, which means that they say maybe yes. Maybe we have to change way. Maybe it's quite a lot, considering the fact that the Joint Arab list received only 6 Knesset mandates. So there is a change. Mm-hmm. The big question is what will be next. For the moment, according to some polls that were published, most of the Israeli Arabs support his joining the coalition. Yes, they support it, but now they are all waiting for results, and nobody knows if it's going to work or not. Money is not the problem. Money is going to receive as much as he wants. The question is what will be the result.
All right, Ben-Dror Yamini, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Israel's meteorologists saying clear skies, staying put for now, and are calling for lows in the upper teens and low 20s in Celsius, depending on the area, and are calling for highs tomorrow in the upper 20s and lower 30s in Celsius. Now back to the studio with Aaron.
All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.27 shekels to the American dollar and 2.63 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.